Oxford University, where geniuses are literally made, just voted on the smartest BTS member. Not a fan poll, not a popularity contest. Oxford students, trained to think critically, actually debated and ranked all 7 members based on real intelligence. But here's the twist. Intelligence isn't just IQ, it's creativity, emotional depth, strategy, and instinct. So, did the highest IQ win? Which member shocked everyone by ranking higher than expected? And who landed at number 1 that made even diehard fans gasp? 7 members, 7 ranks, 0 ties. You're not ready.
Number 7. Jin. Now, before you lose your mind, before you flood the comments with "How is Jin at number 7?" take a deep breath, sit back, and actually listen. Because being number 7 on a list voted by Oxford University students doesn't mean Jin is anything close to unintelligent. Let's be absolutely real here. If you're on this list at all, you're already in a league most human beings will never reach. This isn't a ranking of who's dumb and who's smart. This is a ranking of 7 extraordinarily brilliant individuals, and somebody has to be at the 7th spot. The fact that it's Jin, that actually tells you a fascinating story about how Oxford students define intelligence, and why their criteria might be very different from what you expect. So, let's talk about Kim Sejok Jin. Born December 4th, 1992 in Gwacheon, Gyeonggi Province, South Korea. The eldest member of BTS, the man who literally got street casted by a big hit entertainment talent scout because he was so impossibly good looking that the scout chased him down and asked, "Are you an actor? Are you a trainee? What are you?" And Jin, being the absolute legend he is, almost walked away. Almost. Think about that for a second. The entire trajectory of BTS, the biggest musical act in the history of modern pop culture, could have been fundamentally different if Jin had just kept walking that day. But he didn't, and the rest, as they say, is history. Now, here's where it gets interesting from an academic standpoint. Jin enrolled at Jungkook University, one of South Korea's top-tier private universities, and studied film and visual arts. He didn't just coast through it either. He actually graduated. In an industry where most idols drop out of college because the training schedule is absolutely inhumane, Jin held on. He balanced the brutal, bone-crushing hours of K-pop idol training. We're talking 16, sometimes 18-hour days of vocal lessons, dance practice, language study, variety show filming, and recording sessions with actual university coursework. And we're not talking about some easy major either. Film and visual arts at Jungkook requires deep critical analysis of cinema, storytelling structure, visual composition theory, media history, and cultural semiotics. Jin didn't just learn how to act, he learned how to deconstruct narratives, how to understand why a scene makes you feel a certain way, how to analyze the invisible architecture behind a movie or a photograph. That's intellectual work. That's the kind of thinking that requires you to engage both your analytical brain and your creative instincts simultaneously. And on top of that, Jin later enrolled in Hanyang Cyber University for a graduate program, furthering his studies while being a member of the biggest band on the planet. The man was literally performing at sold-out stadiums in front of 90,000 screaming fans, and then going home to do coursework. Let that sink in. But here's why Oxford students placed him at number 7, and it's a reason that actually reveals a lot about how elite academic minds evaluate intelligence. Jin's brilliance is what you'd call socially camouflaged. He hides it, deliberately, intentionally, masterfully. Jin has built an entire public persona around being the funny guy, the meme king, the dad joke machine, the one who breaks tension in interviews with perfectly timed humor that makes even the most serious journalist crack up. And most people, most casual viewers, see that and think, oh, he's the silly one. But Oxford students, they saw through it. They recognized it for what it really is, an incredibly sophisticated form of social intelligence. The ability to read a room in a fraction of a second, to calculate the exact moment that a joke will land for maximum impact, to diffuse pressure on his younger members by deliberately drawing attention to himself. That's not randomness. That's strategy. That's emotional calculus happening in real time. During BTS's early years, when they were facing intense criticism, financial struggles, and an industry that largely dismissed them, Jin became the emotional anchor of the group. He used humor as a shield, as a weapon, as medicine. There are countless behind-the-scenes moments where you can see the younger members stressed, exhausted, on the verge of breaking down, and Jin steps in with a perfectly absurd joke or a ridiculous face that shatters the tension instantly. That doesn't happen by accident. That's a man who understands human psychology at an almost instinctual level. He knows what people need to hear, when they need to hear it, and how to deliver it so it doesn't feel forced. The Oxford students noted something else too. Jin's musical intelligence is massively underrated. His vocal technique, while often overshadowed by the powerhouse that is Jungkook or the raw emotion of V and Jimin, is technically precise and remarkably controlled.
Number 6. J-Hope. Okay, now this is where the conversation starts to get really, really interesting. Because if there's one member of BTS who the general public consistently underestimates when it comes to raw intellectual power, it's Jung Ho-seok, J-Hope, the man they call the sunshine of BTS. And right now, I already know what some of you are thinking. J-Hope? Number 6? He should be higher. Or maybe even, wait, I didn't expect him here at all. And that reaction, that surprise, that split-second moment of recalibration happening in your brain right now, that's exactly what the Oxford students experienced when they actually sat down and analyzed what this man has accomplished. Because J-Hope isn't just a dancer. He isn't just the bright, happy energy source who keeps the group's morale alive. He is, by every measurable standard, one of the most strategically intelligent performers in the entire history of modern music. And the fact that most people don't immediately see that is, ironically, proof of just how smart he really is. Let's start from the very beginning. Jung Ho-seok was born on February 18, 1994, in Gwangju, South Korea, a city known for its fierce, independent spirit and its rich cultural identity. And from a ridiculously young age, Ho-seok wasn't just interested in dance, he was consumed by it. He trained in street dance, popping, locking, boogaloo, and freestyle at the Gwangju Music Academy. And he wasn't some casual hobbyist. He was winning. National competitions, regional showcases, underground dance battles where kids twice his age were getting outperformed by this skinny teenager from Gwangju who moved like gravity was optional. He won a national dance competition in 2008, and his reputation in the underground dance scene was already solidified before he even thought about becoming a K-pop idol. But here's the part that most people gloss over, and the part that made Oxford students pay very close attention. When J-Hope auditioned for Big Hit Entertainment, he wasn't auditioning as a singer or a rapper, he was a dancer. Pure and simple. But somewhere between entering those doors and debuting with BTS in 2013, J-Hope made a decision that reveals a kind of strategic intelligence that most people don't develop until they're well into their 30s. He decided to become a rapper. Not because he had to, not because someone forced him, but because he analyzed the group's composition, identified a gap, recognized that his rhythmic instincts from dance could translate directly into rap flow, and then, and this is the insane part, he taught himself. He studied rap structure, breath control, wordplay, cadence, and delivery with the same obsessive discipline he'd applied to dance. And he didn't just become passable, he became genuinely, undeniably good. His verse on Daydream is considered one of the most technically complex flows in BTS's entire discography. His mixtape, Hope World, released in 2018, debuted at number 63 on the Billboard 200, making him the highest-charting Korean solo act on that chart at the time. Let me say that again, the highest-charting Korean solo act on the Billboard 200. A dancer from Gwangju who taught himself to rap did that. And Hope World wasn't some thrown-together vanity project. It was a carefully constructed, sonically adventurous piece of work that blended genres, pop, funk, synthwave, old-school hip-hop, EDM, into something that felt cohesive, personal, and wildly creative. Music critics noted the sophistication of the album's structure, the way each track flowed into the next, creating a narrative arc about optimism, self-discovery, and the terrifying beauty of chasing your dreams. That's not just musical talent, that's architectural thinking applied to sound. Then came Jack in the Box in 2022, his first official solo album, and this is where J-Hope did something that made the Oxford students genuinely sit up and take notice. He completely reinvented himself. Instead of leaning into the bright, happy persona the world expected, he went dark, he went raw, he went aggressive. Tracks like More and Arson were punk-influenced, gritty, confrontational, the complete opposite of what J-Hope the Sunshine was supposed to deliver. And it worked. It wasn't a gimmick. It was a calculated artistic evolution, a deliberate shedding of expectations, and it demonstrated something that Oxford psychology and business students immediately recognized: adaptive intelligence. The ability to assess your own brand, identify its limitations, predict audience fatigue, and pivot before the market forces you to. That's not just artistry. That's CEO-level strategic thinking wrapped in a rapper's body. But let's go deeper, because the Oxford students didn't just look at his music, they looked at his role within BTS as a unit, and this is where J-Hope's intelligence becomes almost frighteningly impressive.
Number 5. Jungkook. And just like that, we've hit the point in this ranking where casual fans start losing their minds. Because Jungkook, the man the entire world calls the Golden Machine, the member who can seemingly do anything and everything at an almost supernatural level, is sitting at number 5. Not number 1, not number 2, number 5. And I need you to understand something before you react. The Oxford students who placed him here, they didn't do it because they underestimate Jungkook. They did it because they understand something about intelligence that most people fundamentally miss. There's a massive, critical, world-altering difference between being gifted at everything and being intellectually deep in something. And that distinction, that razor-thin line between extraordinary talent and raw intellectual power, is exactly what separates Jungkook from the 4 members above him. But don't get it twisted. Being number 5 on a list voted by Oxford University students means you're operating at a level of cognitive ability that most human beings on this planet will never even come close to. So let's break down exactly why the Golden Machine earned this spot, and why the reasons behind it might actually make you respect him more, not less. Jungkook was born on September 1st, 1997 in Busan, South Korea, the country's second-largest city, a port town known for its raw energy, its grit, and its no-nonsense culture. And from the very start, Jungkook was different. Not different in a subtle way, different in a way that made adults stop and stare. The story of how he joined Big Hit Entertainment has become legendary in K-pop history, but it's worth retelling because it reveals something crucial about how his brain works. In 2011, a 13-year-old Jungkook auditioned for the reality show Superstar K3. He didn't make it past the early rounds, but here's the thing. After his audition aired, 7 different entertainment companies contacted him. 7. SM Entertainment, JYP Entertainment, FNC Entertainment, the biggest names in the industry all wanted this kid. He could have gone anywhere. He could have chosen the safe route, the established path, the company with the most guaranteed success. But instead, this 13-year-old boy from Busan chose Big Hit Entertainment, a small, struggling company that was practically bankrupt at the time, because he watched RM rehearse and thought, I want to follow that person. A 13-year-old boy made a decision not based on security, not based on brand recognition, not based on financial logic, but on an instinctive reading of another human being's potential. And that decision, that single gut-level choice made by a barely teenage kid, ended up being the most consequential career decision in the history of K-pop. The Oxford students flagged this moment specifically because it demonstrates something cognitive scientists call hyper-accelerated acquisition intelligence. Most 13-year-olds can barely decide what to eat for lunch. Jungkook looked at a struggling trainee in a failing company and saw a future worth betting his entire life on. That's not luck, that's a brain operating at a frequency most adults never reach. Now let's talk about why they call him the Golden Mockney, because this nickname isn't just a cute fan-given title, it's a clinically accurate description of a cognitive phenomenon that genuinely baffles people who study human performance. Jungkook is good at everything, and I don't mean good in the casual, oh he's pretty decent sense. I mean he picks things up at a speed that borders on the scientifically inexplicable. Singing, he's the main vocalist of the biggest group on Earth, with a range, control, and emotional delivery that vocal coaches have called generationally rare. Dancing, he's not the dance leader, but his execution is so sharp, so precise, so effortlessly powerful that choreographers have said he could be a main dancer in virtually any group in the industry. Drawing, he sketches with a level of detail and compositional awareness that actual art students find intimidating. Filmmaking, he taught himself video editing, color grading, and cinematography, and his self-produced content, the Golden Closet films, showcase a visual storytelling sensibility that film students at major universities have analyzed in academic papers. Photography, he's been seen using professional-grade cameras with a natural eye for lighting and framing. Sports, the man is absurdly athletic. Bowling, archery, running, swimming. He picks up physical skills like his body is running some kind of advanced optimization software. Cooking, he went from barely being able to make ramen to producing genuinely impressive dishes, documented on camera within what felt like an impossibly short frame time. The Oxford students identified this pattern and gave it a specific label, hyper-accelerated acquisition intelligence.
Number 4. Jimin. Alright, let me tell you something right now. If you've been watching this list and thinking it's just about book smarts and IQ numbers, number 4 is about to completely shatter that assumption. Because Park Jimin doesn't just possess intelligence, he weaponizes it. He takes every ounce of his cognitive power, emotional, physical, artistic, psychological, and channels it into performance so devastating, so viscerally precise, that Oxford students who studied his work didn't just analyze him, they felt him. And in the halls of one of the most intellectually rigorous institutions on the planet, where logic reigns supreme and emotion is typically dissected rather than experienced, the fact that Jimin made people feel something, that tells you everything you need to know about the kind of intelligence this man carries. Park Jimin was born on October 13, 1995, in Gumjeong District, Busan, South Korea. And unlike some of his bandmates who stumbled into the entertainment industry through chance encounters or casual auditions, Jimin's path was deliberate, disciplined, and almost militaristically structured from the start. He attended Busan High School of Arts, majoring in contemporary dance. And here's the detail that most people hear but don't truly process. He was the top student, not a good student, not a promising student, the top student, number 1. In a specialized performing arts high school where every single student was already pre-selected for exceptional talent, Jimin stood above all of them. Do you understand what that means? In a room full of the most gifted young dancers in the Busan region, this kid was the one that teachers looked at and said, he's different. And the Oxford students, particularly those studying kinesiology, neuroscience, and cognitive motor control, zeroed in on exactly why Jimin was different, and what they found is genuinely extraordinary. Contemporary dance, unlike pop choreography or street dance, requires something that goes far beyond physical ability. It demands interpretive intelligence, the ability to take an abstract emotion, an intangible concept, a feeling that has no physical form, and translate it into movement that makes other people experience that same emotion without a single word being spoken. That's not just dancing, that's nonverbal communication operating at the highest possible cognitive level.
It requires simultaneous processing of spatial awareness, emotional recall, muscular microcontrol, rhythmic interpretation, audience awareness, and narrative construction, all happening in real time, all synthesized into a single fluid motion that looks effortless, but involves more neurological computation than most people use in an entire day. And Jimin was the best at this, at 16 years old, in a school of kids who had trained since childhood. The Oxford neuroscience students specifically noted that Jimin's body control suggests an extraordinarily refined proprioceptive system. That's the body's ability to sense its own position, movement, and spatial orientation without visual confirmation. Most humans have a functional proprioceptive system. Dancers have an enhanced one. Jimin's appears to be operating at a level that borders on what researchers would call elite kinesthetic intelligence, a cognitive physical integration so advanced that his body essentially becomes an extension of his thought process, with virtually zero lag between intention and execution. Watch his performance of Lie during BTS's Wings tour. Watch it carefully. Every single movement, every twist of his wrist, every arch of his spine, every controlled collapse to the floor is telling a story. It's not choreography, it's confession. It's a man using his body to articulate psychological torment, internal conflict, and the desperate human desire to break free from self-deception. Professional dance critics have called that performance one of the most emotionally intelligent solo stages in the history of idol performance. Not the most technically difficult, although it is technically extraordinary, but the most emotionally intelligent. Because Jimin doesn't dance at you, he dances through you. He bypasses your analytical brain entirely and hits you directly in the emotional center. And by the time your conscious mind catches up, you're already feeling something you can't fully explain. That's intelligence. That's a brain that understands human psychology so deeply that it can manipulate emotional states through movement alone. Now let's talk about his vocal intelligence, because this is another area where the Oxford students found something that most casual listeners completely miss. Jimin's voice is often described by fans as unique or distinctive, but those words don't capture what's actually happening. Jimin sings with a technique that vocal coaches have described as controlled tension. He deliberately places strain on certain notes, adds a breathiness or a crack at precisely calculated moments to create an emotional texture that perfectly produced, technically clean vocals cannot achieve.
Number 3, BTS V. And there it is. The name that just sent a shockwave through half of you reading this right now. Kim Taehyung. V. Number 3. And I already know that this is the placement on this list that's going to generate the most debate, the most analysis, the most weight. Let me think about that moments of anything we've discussed so far. Because V is the enigma. He always has been. From the very first day BTS stepped onto a stage, Taehyung has been the member that people can't quite figure out, can't quite categorize, can't quite put into a neat little box and label. And the Oxford students? The ones who are literally trained to categorize, to analyze, to dissect complex subjects into understandable frameworks? Even they admitted that V broke their models. He didn't fit. And the reason he didn't fit is the exact reason he's sitting at number 3 on this list. Because Kim Taehyung possesses a form of intelligence so rare that most academic frameworks don't even have a proper name for it. Let's start where it all began. Kim Taehyung was born on December 30th, 1995, in the Seo district of Daegu, South Korea. He grew up in a farming family in Gyeocheon County, not in the flashy, hyper-connected urban sprawl of Seoul, not in a family of artists or intellectuals, but in the quiet, earthy, grounded countryside of rural South Korea. And this detail matters more than most people realize, because the environment you grow up in fundamentally shapes how your brain processes the world. Taehyung didn't grow up surrounded by screens and algorithms and curated content. He grew up surrounded by nature, by seasons, by the slow rhythm of agricultural life. And multiple developmental psychologists have noted that this kind of upbringing tends to produce minds that think in textures, in colors, in sensory landscapes rather than in linear logic. And that is precisely the kind of mind V has. He wasn't originally supposed to be in BTS. Let that settle for a moment. He accompanied a friend to the big hit audition in Taegu. His friend. Not him. He was just there for moral support. But a big hit staff member spotted him, saw something in him, some indefinable quality, some frequency he was transmitting that most people couldn't consciously detect, and convinced him to audition on the spot. He wasn't prepared. He hadn't trained. He just walked in and did something. Whatever that something was, it was enough to change the entire trajectory of K-pop history. And here's what's eerie about that moment. V was a hidden member before BTS's debut. Big Hit kept his existence secret from the public until just before their first stage. The other 6 members were introduced gradually through social media and pre-debut content, but V was deliberately concealed. When he was finally revealed, the reaction was seismic. Fans didn't just notice him. They were magnetized by him. And that magnetism, that ability to captivate without trying, to command attention without demanding it, is itself a form of intelligence that the Oxford students spent significant time analyzing. They called it gravitational presence cognition, the neurological capacity to project a personal frequency that overrides the attention filters of everyone in proximity. It sounds almost mystical, but it's actually grounded in research on mirror neurons, micro-expression processing, and nonverbal dominance signaling. V doesn't just look unique. His brain outputs social signals at a wavelength that human attention systems are hardwired to prioritize. And he does it without effort, without strategy, without even seeming to be aware of it. But let's move past the surface, because the Oxford students went deep into what makes Taehyung's intelligence genuinely extraordinary. And it starts with his relationship to art. Not music. Art. Visual art. Classical art. Aesthetic philosophy. V is obsessed with art in a way that goes far beyond casual appreciation. He's a devoted admirer of Vincent van Gogh, not just the paintings, but the philosophy, the letters, the psychological landscape of a man who saw the world in colors that didn't exist for anyone else. He's spoken extensively about how Van Gogh's work makes him feel understood, how looking at the starry night gives him a sensation of emotional recognition, as if Van Gogh was painting something that V has always felt but never had words for. And the Oxford art history students pointed out something profound about this connection. V doesn't engage with art the way most people do. Most people look at a painting and evaluate it. They assess technique, composition, color theory, historical context. V looks at a painting and inhabits it. He enters it emotionally, psychologically, almost spiritually. His engagement with visual art is synesthetic. He doesn't just see colors, he feels them. He doesn't just observe composition, he experiences it as a spatial emotion. That's not something you can learn. That's a neurological trait. A brain wired to process sensory information across multiple channels simultaneously, creating a richness of experience that most people simply don't have access to. And this artistic intelligence bleeds into everything V does. His photography, and he is a genuinely skilled photographer, demonstrates an eye for composition that professional photographers have noted is unusually sophisticated. He gravitates toward muted tones, natural light, slightly off-center framing, and subjects caught in moments of unposed vulnerability. His photographs look like stills from an art film you can't quite remember, but desperately want to see again. That's not random. That's a visual intelligence processing the world through an aesthetic framework so refined that it produces art instinctively. Then there's his music, and this is where the Oxford students' analysis became genuinely electrifying. Layover, V's debut solo album released in September 2023, is unlike anything any BTS member has ever produced. It's unlike anything in K-pop, period. It's a jazz-influenced, R&B-soaked, intentionally minimal collection of songs that sounds like it was recorded at 3 in the morning in a dimly lit apartment by someone who just finished reading Kimo. Tracks like Slow Dancing, Rainy Days, and Love Me Again are not constructed the way pop songs are typically constructed. They don't build toward explosive choruses. They don't chase hooks. They meander. They breathe. They leave space, enormous, deliberate, almost uncomfortable amounts of space, for the listener to fill with their own emotion. And that artistic choice, that refusal to overproduce, that confidence in silence and subtlety, is something the Oxford music students identified as evidence of a deeply mature musical intelligence. Most artists, especially young pop artists, are terrified of space. They fill every millisecond with sound because they're afraid the audience will lose interest. V trusts the audience to sit in the discomfort, to feel the weight of what isn't being said, and to find meaning in the gaps. That takes an understanding of human psychology and musical narrative that most producers twice his age haven't developed. He also taught himself to play the saxophone. Not as a gimmick, not as a social media moment. He genuinely sat down and learned the instrument because he felt drawn to its tone, its warmth, its ability to express melancholy in a way that the human voice sometimes can't. The saxophone is notoriously difficult to learn. It requires breath control, embouchure development, finger coordination, and an intuitive understanding of jazz phrasing that takes most musicians years to develop. V picked it up, and, while he's not a virtuoso, his playing demonstrates the same quality that defines everything he does: emotional authenticity over technical perfection. He doesn't play the saxophone to impress. He plays it to feel. The Oxford students also analyzed his acting work, his role in the historical K-drama, Hwarang, the poet warrior youth, and noted something that trained acting coaches rarely see in idol actors. V didn't just memorize lines and hit marks. He inhabited his character with a depth of emotional commitment that suggested genuine empathic intelligence, the ability to psychologically become another person, to feel their emotions as your own, to lose yourself so completely in another consciousness that the line between performer and character dissolves. Method actors train for decades to achieve that. V appeared to do it naturally, in his first major acting role, while simultaneously being an active member of the world's biggest musical group. And then there's his personality, the thing that confuses people, that frustrates interviewers, that makes fans simultaneously adore him and feel like they'll never fully understand him. V operates on what the Oxford psychology students described as a non-linear cognitive axis. Most people think in sequences. A leads to B leads to C. V thinks in constellations. A connects to F, connects to M, connects to a childhood memory, connects to the color blue, connects to a Van Gogh painting, connects to the feeling of rain on skin. His conversational style, often perceived as random or quirky, is actually evidence of an associative thinking pattern that is extremely common among highly creative individuals and is strongly correlated with divergent intelligence, the ability to generate novel ideas, unexpected connections, and original solutions by processing information through non-traditional cognitive pathways. When V says something in an interview that seems to come from nowhere, it didn't come from nowhere. It came from a mind that is connecting dots that the rest of us can't see because our brains aren't wired to look in those directions. Number 2. BTS V. Number 2. Suga. Listen to me very carefully, because what I'm about to tell you about Min Yoongi is going to fundamentally restructure the way you understand what it means to be brilliant. Not talented, not skilled, not gifted, brilliant. The kind of brilliant that burns slow and quiet and deep, like a fire in a sealed room that nobody sees until it's consumed everything. Suga is number 2 on this list, and when I tell you that the margin between number 2 and number 1 was so razor thin that Oxford students literally argued about it for longer than any other placement on this entire ranking, I need you to understand that this isn't a consolation prize. This is a man who came within a hair's width of being declared the smartest member of BTS by one of the most elite academic institutions on Earth. And the story of how he got here, the story of Min Yoongi, the kid from Daegu who was never supposed to survive, let alone conquer the world, is one of the most intellectually staggering narratives in modern music history. Min Yoongi was born on March 9, 1993, in Daegu, South Korea, the same city as V, but a completely different universe in terms of experience. Yoongi grew up in what he's described, in his own blunt, unflinching words, as poverty. Not, we couldn't afford luxury poverty. Real poverty. The kind where you're not sure if there's going to be food. The kind where your parents work themselves to physical breakdown and it's still not enough. The kind where the idea of becoming a musician isn't just unrealistic. It's almost offensive, because how dare you dream about art when your family can barely keep the lights on? And most people, when they hear this backstory, process it as a sympathetic origin story, a sad beginning before the happy ending. But the Oxford students processed it differently. They processed it as the foundational crucible of an extraordinary mind. Because Jungi didn't just survive poverty. He used it. He metabolized it. He converted economic deprivation into cognitive fuel, and the way he did it reveals a form of intellectual resilience that psychologists call adversity-driven cognitive acceleration. The phenomenon where extreme hardship forces the brain to develop problem-solving pathways, emotional regulation mechanisms, and strategic thinking capabilities far beyond what comfortable environments typically produce. By his early teens, Jungi had already discovered hip-hop, specifically the raw, unfiltered, confrontational hip-hop of the American underground. Eminem, Nas, Wu-Tang Clan, Notorious B.I.G. And he didn't just listen to it casually. He reverse-engineered it. He sat in his tiny room in Daegu, broke down song structures bar by bar, analyzed rhyme schemes mathematically, studied flow patterns like a linguistics student dissecting syntax, and taught himself to produce beats on equipment so basic and outdated that professional producers would have thrown it in the trash. By the time he was 17, he was performing in Daegu's underground rap scene under the name Gloss, and he wasn't just participating. He was winning. He was recognized. In an underground scene known for its brutal honesty and zero tolerance for weakness, a teenager was earning respect from rappers years older than him, not because of his image or his connections, but because his lyrics were sharper, his wordplay was denser, and his understanding of musical structure was more sophisticated than people who had been doing it for a decade. The Oxford linguistics students analyzed Suga's Korean language lyricism and found something genuinely remarkable. His rhyme schemes operate on multiple simultaneous levels. He doesn't just rhyme in syllables. He layers internal rhymes, assonance, consonants, double entendres, and cultural references into structures so densely packed that a single 4-bar verse can contain more linguistic information than entire songs by other artists. His lyrics in August D, his alter ego project, have been compared by Korean literature professors to the structural complexity of classical Korean poetry forms, particularly Sejong, where meaning operates on both a surface narrative level and a deeper philosophical subtext simultaneously. He's not just writing rap verses. He's constructing linguistic architecture. And then there's his production work. And this is where the Oxford students' jaws hit the floor. Jungi isn't just a rapper who makes beats on the side. He is a genuine, world-class music producer whose body of work spans an almost incomprehensible range of genres, styles, and emotional territories. He has production credits on BTS tracks that range from explosive hip-hop bangers to delicate piano ballads to experimental soundscapes that don't fit neatly into any genre at all. He produced Life Goes On, a song that debuted at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 during the pandemic, a track so emotionally precise in its simplicity that it became an anthem for an entire planet in mourning. He didn't overproduce it. He didn't bury it in layers of synthetic sound. He stripped it back, left it raw, let the emotion breathe, because he understood, with the instinct of a master, that a world drowning in grief didn't need spectacle. It needed warmth. That production choice alone demonstrates a level of emotional intelligence and cultural awareness that most established producers with decades of experience never achieve. His August D trilogy, August D, 2016, D2, 2020, and D-Day, 2023, is one of the most ambitious, intellectually demanding solo projects in the history of popular music. And the Oxford students analyzed it not just as music, but as a psychological document. The trilogy traces the complete arc of a human mind, from rage and survival in August D, through philosophical questioning and self-confrontation in D2, to acceptance, peace, and the terrifying vulnerability of letting go in D-Day. The last, a track from the first mixtape, is a clinical, almost forensic description of depression, anxiety, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. Jungi doesn't poeticize mental illness. He doesn't romanticize it. He describes it with the cold, precise, unflinching clarity of a medical case study. Except it's his own case study, his own brain he's dissecting, his own darkness he's laying out on the operating table for the entire world to examine. Oxford psychology students noted that the level of self-awareness required to articulate your own mental health struggles with that degree of specificity and objectivity, while simultaneously converting that articulation into art that resonates with millions. represents a cognitive feat of extraordinary complexity. He's simultaneously the patient, the doctor, the writer, and the performer. He's analyzing his own consciousness in real time and transmuting the analysis into music. That's not just intelligence. That's intellectual courage of the highest order. And his world tour, the D-Day tour that culminated in a legendary concert at the Seoul World Cup Stadium, was a masterpiece of conceptual performance. It wasn't a concert. It was a thesis. The setlist was structured as a narrative journey through his entire career, his entire psychological evolution, his entire transformation from an angry underground rapper in Taegu to a globally recognized artist who had finally made peace with himself. The staging, the lighting, the visual design, the sequencing of songs. Every element was calibrated to take the audience on an emotional journey that mirrored his own internal journey. That's directorial intelligence. That's the same cognitive skill set that auteur filmmakers use, the ability to control every element of a complex, multisensory experience to produce a specific emotional trajectory in the audience. Let's talk about the business side too, because the Oxford economics and business students had a field day with Jung's career decisions. He has been one of the most strategically intelligent members of BTS in terms of career management. His decision to maintain the August D persona, a separate artistic identity that allows him to express things that might not fit within BTS's collective brand, is a textbook case of brand architecture theory. He didn't just create an alter ego. He created a parallel brand that protects the main brand while expanding his artistic range. Marketing professors at major business schools have used this exact strategy as a case study. A rapper from Taegu, with no formal business education, intuitively implemented a branding strategy that MBA graduates study in textbooks. He also has extensive production credits for artists outside BTS. He's produced and written for artists like Halsey, IU, Juice WRLD, and others, demonstrating a creative versatility and collaborative intelligence that functions across cultural boundaries, language barriers, and genre conventions. Each collaboration requires him to subordinate his own artistic ego to serve someone else's vision while still maintaining his signature sonic identity. That's a balancing act that requires a sophistication of thought that most producers never master. The Oxford students also examined something that's often overlooked in discussions of Jung's intelligence, his philosophical depth. In interviews, in his lyrics, in his V-Lives, Jung consistently demonstrates a level of reflective thinking that goes beyond what you'd expect from a pop star. He speaks about time, about mortality, about the nature of happiness, about the illusion of success, with a quiet, measured wisdom that sounds like it comes from someone who has spent years in serious contemplation. He once said, "I have number 1, Suga, number 1 Namjoon." And there he is, the name you've been waiting for. The name that half of you predicted from the very first second of this ranking, and the name that the other half are now nodding slowly at, thinking, yeah, that makes sense. Kim Namjoon, RM, the leader of BTS. The number 1 smartest member of BTS as voted by Oxford University students. And here's what I need you to understand before we dive into this. RM being number 1 is not a default. It's not a lazy choice. It's not, oh, he has the highest IQ, so obviously he wins. The Oxford students didn't hand him this spot because of a number on a test he took when he was a teenager. They gave him this spot because when they analyzed every dimension of intelligence, linguistic, logical, emotional, creative, philosophical, strategic, cultural, interpersonal, and visionary, Kim Namjoon didn't just score high. He dominated across every single category, with a consistency and a depth that no other member, as extraordinary as they all are, could match. And the story of how a kid from Ilsan became the intellectual anchor of the most influential musical act of the 21st century is not just inspiring. It's a case study in what happens when raw cognitive power meets relentless curiosity, meets an almost pathological refusal to stop learning. Kim Namjoon was born on September 12, 1994, in Ilsan, a suburban district of Goyang, just northwest of Seoul. And from an absurdly young age, his brain was operating differently. His IQ has been reported at 148. Let's pause on that number for a second, because most people hear high IQ and don't really process what that means in practical terms. An IQ of 148 places Namjoon in approximately the top 0.1% of the global population. That means if you put 1,000 randomly selected people in a room, Namjoon would statistically be the most intelligent person there. If you put 10,000 people in a room, he'd still likely be in the top 10. That's not smart. That's cognitively elite in a way that fundamentally alters how you perceive, process, and interact with reality. But, and this is the critical point the Oxford students emphasized, IQ alone doesn't make you number one. IQ is potential. It's the engine. What matters is what you do with that engine, where you drive it, and how far you're willing to push it. And what Namjoon has done with his cognitive gifts is nothing short of extraordinary. Let's start with language, because this is the domain where Namjoon first made the Oxford linguistics students sit up and pay very, very close attention. Namjoon taught himself English. Not through formal education. Not through years of study abroad. Not through expensive tutors or immersive language programs. He watched the American sitcom Friends. That's it. That's the origin story. A teenage kid in suburban South Korea watched a TV show and reverse-engineered an entire language from it. And he didn't just learn conversational English, the kind where you can order food and ask for directions. He learned nuanced, sophisticated, culturally layered English, the kind where you understand idioms, humor, subtext, double meanings, emotional connotation, and the invisible social rules that native speakers absorb unconsciously over decades. His English is so fluent, so natural, so contextually precise that during BTS's interviews with Western media, he doesn't just translate, he adapts. He reformulates ideas, adjusts cultural references, modulates his tone to match the conversational register of whoever he's speaking to, and does it all in real time, without visible effort. The Oxford linguistics students noted that this level of autodidactic language acquisition, learning a language to near native fluency through media consumption alone, is exceptionally rare and is strongly correlated with what linguists call hyperlinguistic aptitude, a cognitive trait characterized by enhanced pattern recognition in phonological and syntactic systems. Namjoon's brain doesn't just learn languages. It decodes them. It identifies structural patterns, extracts grammatical rules from context, and builds internal models of linguistic systems with a speed and accuracy that formal language education often fails to achieve. And it's not just English. His understanding of Japanese, his engagement with classical Chinese characters and Korean vocabulary, his ability to play with linguistic structures across multiple languages in his lyrics. All of it points to a mind that processes language not as a tool for communication, but as an infinitely complex system to be explored, deconstructed, and mastered. Now let's talk about his lyrics, because this is where the Oxford literature students became genuinely emotional. Namjoon's lyricism is not pop songwriting. It is, by any serious literary standard, poetry, and not the accessible, Instagram caption kind of poetry. Dense, elusive, philosophically rigorous poetry that references Nietzsche, Jung, Kafka, Ursula K. Le Guin, Murray Gell-Mann's quark theory, the map territory relation from Alfred Korzybski's general semantics, Korean Buddhist philosophy, and the existential paradoxes of modern identity, sometimes within the same song. His track, Persona, opens with a direct reference to the Jungian concept of the persona, the social mask that humans construct to navigate society, and then systematically deconstructs that concept through 3 verses that move from self-questioning to self-acceptance to a final, devastating acknowledgement that the mask and the face may be the same thing. That's not a pop song. That's a philosophical treatise disguised as a hip-hop track. Moonchild, from his mixtape, Mono, is a meditation on loneliness, creativity, and the paradox of finding beauty in darkness that draws on imagery and thematic structures reminiscent of Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet. Oxford English literature students analyzed the lyrical structure and noted that Namjoon uses extended metaphor with a sophistication that would be impressive in a published poet, let alone a 20-something rapper writing in his second language. Wildflower, from his solo album Indigo, is a collaboration with Eugene that explores the tension between wanting to burn brightly and wanting to endure quietly, a thematic dichotomy that echoes classical Korean philosophical tensions between Jong, deep emotional attachment, and Mujong, detachment. The song operates on personal, cultural, and philosophical levels simultaneously, and each level enriches the others in a way that rewards repeated listening and analysis. The Oxford students spent over an hour discussing Indigo alone, because the album represents something genuinely rare in popular music, a work of art that functions as a complete intellectual autobiography. Each track is built around a collaboration with someone who influenced Namjoon's thinking, musicians, artists, writers, and the album's concept is explicitly about the process of finding your own color, your own identity, through the people and ideas that shape you. That's not just an album concept. That's a philosophical framework for understanding human identity development, rendered in musical form. Then there's Right Place, Wrong Person in 2024, which the Oxford students described as one of the most intellectually ambitious pop records they had ever encountered. The album's central thesis, that you can be exactly where you're supposed to be and still feel fundamentally disconnected from everything around you, is a direct engagement with existentialist philosophy, particularly Heidegger's concept of thrownness and Sartre's notion of radical freedom as a source of anguish rather than liberation. And Namjoon doesn't just reference these ideas abstractly. He lives them. He embodies them in lyrics that are simultaneously deeply personal and universally resonant. Now let's talk about his speeches, because this is where Namjoon transcended music entirely and entered a realm of global intellectual influence that no pop artist has ever occupied. His speech at the United Nations General Assembly in September 2018, the Speak Yourself address, is studied in communication departments at universities worldwide. Not because a pop star spoke at the UN, but because the speech itself is a masterclass in rhetorical construction. He opened with vulnerability, sharing his childhood, his hometown, his early dreams, establishing ethos through authenticity. He built toward his core message, that self-acceptance is not a destination but a continuous, imperfect process, using anaphora, parallel structure, and emotionally calibrated pacing that held the attention of a room full of world leaders, diplomats, and policy experts. And he delivered it in English, his second language, in front of the United Nations. At 23 years old, the Oxford Rhetoric and Communications students analyzed the speech and noted that Namjoon's rhetorical instincts, his ability to balance personal narrative with universal message, to modulate emotional intensity, to land key phrases with rhythmic precision, are comparable to trained orators with decades of public speaking experience. He returned to the UN in 2021 and again in 2022, each time demonstrating an evolving sophistication in his messaging, his delivery, and his ability to engage with complex global issues, youth empowerment, mental health, sustainable development, without reducing them to platitudes. His art museum visits have become iconic, documented on social media with commentary that reveals a genuinely...
And there you have it, the complete ranking. 7 members, 7 different kinds of genius. From Jin's emotionally camouflaged social brilliance at number 7, to J-Hope's strategic and kinesthetic mastery at number 6, to Jungkook's hyper-accelerated learning intelligence at number 5, to Jimin's devastating fusion of physical precision and emotional depth at number 4, to V's hauntingly rare artistic cognition at number 3, to Suga's philosophical and linguistic fire forged in adversity at number 2, all the way to RM's all-encompassing intellectual dominance at number 1. What Oxford students proved with this ranking isn't that one member is smart and the others aren't. It's the opposite. They proved that intelligence isn't a single thing. It's a spectrum, vast, complex, multidimensional, and every single member of BTS occupies a unique, irreplaceable point on that spectrum. Remove any one of them and the whole system collapses. That's not a group, that's an intellectual ecosystem. 7 minds, 7 frequencies, one unstoppable force. And maybe the smartest thing any of them ever did wasn't something they did alone, it was the decision to do it together. Thanks for watching. If this ranking made you think, made you argue, made you see these 7 men in a way you never did before, then it did exactly what it was supposed to do. Stay curious, stay open, and never, ever underestimate the intelligence of someone just because the world told you they're just a pop star. They never were.